Welcome to the Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast, your go-to resource for navigating the world of entrepreneurship. In this episode, we're tackling one of the most critical aspects of entrepreneurship, planning and executing a successful exit. This is part 2 of 2 parts.
Our podcast addresses tools and concepts that are useful for the launch and growth of entrepreneurial ventures. Your 2 hosts will be Professor Gary Palin and serial entrepreneur Ryan Budden.
Hello, Ryan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing brilliantly. What about you?
Still busy. Just keep plugging along and moving forward.
Fantastic.
Ryan, today I would like to continue our conversation about exit strategies. And if you recall, an exit strategy is preparing for the sale of a business to buyers to recoup the investment of both the founding entrepreneurs and the investors.
Right.
In our last episode, we just talked about overall about the definition of an exit strategy, factors to consider when developing your exit strategy, the timing of the exit, and we spent an awful lot of time on 10 steps to prepare for an exit.
Right. So if you haven't listened to that episode, go listen to that before you jump into this one.
You've got that right. The first issue I'd like to speak about today is due diligence and the importance of due diligence. There are 9 areas that I like to consider. But before we delve into that, Ryan, do you mind giving a definition of due diligence?
Yeah. So the due diligence is just the process that a company is going to go through to vet your company. So going through each facet of the business to make sure that what's advertised is actually what's taking place.
So do your homework very deeply.
There we go.
Don't blow it off and say the dog ate it.
Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't go over too well when you're talking about a lot of money.
Well, the first area that I like to look at with my due diligence is the financials. So I'd like to delve very deeply into the company's financial records. That includes their revenues, their expenses, their assets, their liabilities, any financial projections, cash flow, profitability, what their financial stability is. There's quite a bit to go over with the financial due diligence.
Yep. And oftentimes that due diligence is one of the parts that takes the most time. You're going to spend a lot of time talking about financials, verifying that those financials are actually correct and they're not bolstered or inflated in any way.
That really is a key to the value of the business or valuation, what the actual purchase price will be.
We've all seen lots of examples on how having a smart CFO at that time can really increase that valuation by portraying the numbers accurately and as well as accurately in a favorable light.
CFO is such a critical part in any aspect of the business. But the exit, be it an acquisition or an IPO, you better have a strong CFO to help guide that process.
That's exactly right.
Another due diligence area is the operational. You want to understand what the day-to-day operations are of the business. You can review customer satisfaction. Do you have vendor relationships? Production processes, if you're into manufacturing, supply chain, which has become more and more important, and quality of products, services. So there are many operational issues you can delve into.
Oh, absolutely. And the processes behind that are the important part. How automated are things? How little involvement do you have from the higher ups to make things go according to plan on a day-to-day basis? Does everybody know what they're doing? Is it documented and repeatable?
A third area that I definitely look at, and I should say, I have my attorney look at it, or attorneys, because the specialty in every area is the legal due diligence. You don't want to do this yourself if you have no background on this, or even if you have marginal background. You want experts on this. They can include checking for pending or potential lawsuits. Are you complying with laws and regulations? What about your contracts with clients? How strong and how solid are they? Vendor and employee contracts. Do you have all the permits that are necessary to legally operate as a business? This is not something you want to do after the fact, by the way. You want to be doing this continually, but you still have to do a due diligence. And preparing that due diligence makes it much easier to present to the buyer, and it makes the buyer more comfortable. They'll still do their due diligence, but providing them that information makes it a much smoother path.
Yeah, you can pack it up, a lot of that information to give to them. The other note I'll put on the legal due diligence is it's really industry specific. So if you're in a compliant industry, whether it's financial or healthcare, your due diligence process is going to look a lot different than if you're a t-shirt manufacturer.
Just the intellectual property can be very, very specialized, even subsets within industries.
That's right.
An IP attorney is worth their weight in gold.
Oh, absolutely. Even if you think you have a really good handle on your intellectual property, just a small consultation with somebody that's truly an expert in IP can really shift how you perceive what you're protecting and how you're protecting it.
Very often, companies are acquired solely for the acquiring company to get the IP. They'll basically shut down the business. They want the IP. It can be that valuable.
Absolutely. Or buy you to stop you from being a competitor in somebody else's IP, which we're seeing a lot in the technology industry at the moment. Big tech companies buying to use the intellectual property. Most people intelligently looking at the market really realizes they're stopping competitors.
Things like that have been going on for years. Don't let me get my tinfoil hat on and my conspiracy theories going.
Oh, sure. That's a podcast for another time and under a different name.
An area which rolls into the IP issue that I like to look at with due diligence is the technical, the IT section of the company. So you really want to understand the software, the status of the software, hardware that's involved, cybersecurity measures, data privacy, again, the IP issue. They're particularly important for tech-based businesses, but for all businesses, those are areas that you want to look at.
That's the bulk of my consultancy, setting those programs up and reviewing those programs for rounds that are being raised, exits that are happening. There's an enormous, intricate process that goes into not only the valuation of that technology, which is part of a sale, but also making sure it's in good condition, seeing how it's being developed over time to assess technical debt. I could go on and on and on, but it is important, and it's an area that consultants can help out with quite a lot if you don't have a core team that's managed it.
This area that I think is very often overlooked with the due diligence is the human resources. So you want to review any employee contracts, any benefits. You want to have information about retention rates. What are your training programs? And are there any potential labor issues that are on the horizon? As I've mentioned in the previous one, you don't want skeletons in the closet.
This is often when you hear about, especially VC firms, having some pretty crazy tactics of separating people up and making sure people's answers about specific things are lining up appropriately. It sort of gets glorified, but it gets glorified for a reason, because it's super important. Due diligence processes really do go into the human resources, because that's the basis of the team. That's how effectively it's being managed.
Another area that you want to have done a deep dive into due diligence is the market. And it should be data-driven, by the way, to have the company's market position. You want to do a deep analysis of the competition, and those relations are the growth potential. And with that, what are the industry trends? So are we in a declining market? Are we in a market that's about to explode? Those are very important issues to understand.
This is a good one, actually. This is an area that the business can do quite a lot of work to help improve its own standings and packet this information up and share it with the potential investor or payer.
Make sure you have an NDA involved with that, non-disclosure agreement.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes the secret sauce could be lying in there. You don't want to be sharing that without protection.
Absolutely. And you shouldn't be this far in the due diligence process without an NDA in the first place. But especially once you're sharing that secret sauce, as you put, and this is an area that it could be lying in.
Well, a sixth area for due diligence is environmental. And this very much is industry specific. Every business has factors to it, but some are more so. You want to check with compliance on any environmental regulations, potential liabilities, issues with waste management, emissions, etc.
Yeah, I like that you said it's industry specific. I would say it's becoming more industry agnostic, though, as business in general, especially startups, is tending to focus more on triple bottom line, making sure that it's a more wholesome business. Business of age has been demonized to a certain point. Having an eye on what you can do, what are some easy ways that you can have an environmental impact, or just in your local environment, not necessarily on nature itself, but how you're participating in your local ecosystem as the environment you're playing in.
This next one may not be apparent, the strategic due diligence. And why I like to look at that is I'd like to make sure that the strategy of the selling company aligns with that of the purchasing company. Because if there is not a match, that could cause for all types of issues that would make the operations of the business fail in the future.
Oh, without a doubt. This is where an expert in mergers and acquisitions, sales could really help out.
If I'm merging a fast food restaurant with a 5-star gourmet restaurant, and assuming I'm going to operate them under the same brand name, that's not a strategic alignment.
Well, there might be a business model out there for it, but I'm not thinking of it right now. That's right.
The last one, and again, we've spoken about this, and it's a personal passion of ours, the cultural due diligence of a company, because that can affect the employee morale, the brand image, customer satisfaction. You don't want any disruptions in the culture. The purchasing company wants to know, what is the culture of your existing business?
Culture is a trend. A great culture fosters an even better culture. A bad culture fosters a declining culture as the team builds over time. And you're right, it is a passion of ours. We have a venture to help measure, help amplify, and train that team up.
That could be one of the big explosions when you see the mergers of business very often and the cultures don't match. It causes all types of schisms and issues that can cause a demise of both businesses.
And I'd say most entrepreneurs care a lot about their team. It's also when you see this merger, huge layoffs happening. And that's oftentimes because there isn't a good cultural fit. One of the teams, parts of the teams, whatever it is, gets put on the chopping block.
And my son was involved with the business that he's currently working with. He was one of the original employees, and I think it's been acquired 2 or 3 times. And the first time he called me up and he said, the company's been acquired. What do you think? And I said, well, I would get your resume honed up and look at the acquiring company. Are you redundant or are you critical? And if you're redundant, get that resume out. If you're not, then you're of value to the acquiring company. Now, he has obviously been valuable and stayed with the company through several acquisitions. That can be a very big disruption of the culture of the business.
It absolutely can.
After due diligence, we've talked in the previous part 1 about the steps to prepare. Now we've talked about 9 areas of due diligence. Someone listening that wants to prepare for an exit is probably thinking, how the heck can I possibly know and do all of this? And the answer is, you can't. Henceforth, the roles of advisors and experts.
Right. There are people that have done this many times that have serious expertise, and this is their career.
The first one I would look at is investment bankers or mergers and acquisitions advisors. That is an area of expertise. And not only can they help guide you through the process, they can help you determine what the value of the business is with the selling price. They can help you find potential buyers, negotiate the deal, et cetera.
And they can quite oftentimes add value right at the last minute. Some easy gimme steps that they know about that you might not be aware of, they can throw into place to make sure you're getting that value.
Now, another advisor, and hopefully you've been using these advisors throughout the entirety of the business, but the accountants. Again, we talked about the due diligence side, so you have to prepare all of those financial statements. Those are critical issues when you're doing that negotiation. With the due diligence on the legal side, you need legal advisors. They can specialize not only just in the legal structure of the business, the contracts or legal documents involved with the business sale, letter of intent, purchase agreement. They can help you with the non-disclosure agreements. You want to make sure the legal interests are protected.
Absolutely. A good legal advisor should be with you from the very beginning. If they're coming on at this time, they can still do a whole lot, but how you're set up before you get to the due diligence process is really important with that advisor.
Now, one that I personally have experienced that's helped me out is having a tax advisor during the sale. I was involved with, I purchased a business, roll around next tax season, the person I purchased the business from came to me and says, oh, we value things inappropriately. It's going to be a big hit on my taxes. I said, well, that's something you should have had a tax advisor advise you up front, because if we change this, then it's a big hit on my taxes.
Right.
He insisted that we had to do it. I sent it to my accountant, and I called my accountant and said, someone's going to come and talk to you to try to talk you out of something we had done. And he said, I'll take care of it.
Putting the monkey on someone else's shoulders, right?
Yeah, there we go. There's another podcast. Not structuring things properly can have tremendous tax liabilities to you. So you want someone who has an expert in the tax components of the acquisition.
There's very little negotiation with the IRS.
Tell me about it. Another expert, they're also important. If you have a successful acquisition, if you're the original founder and you're exiting the business, and if it's a profitable sale, you want financial advisors and wealth managers, because you'll see many people that will walk out with a nice pile of cash, but it doesn't last because they don't know how to manage that. And those wealth managers can be something that you want to talk about before you actually make the sale.
That's interesting. I don't know that that would have made my list. And I think that's a really important one. Because, right, how you accept that money, where it immediately goes, what it looks like from the sale line items can drastically increase or decrease your tax burden or the benefit as time goes on.
I don't know what the numbers are, but when people win the lottery, a vast majority of them lose all their money within a few years because they don't know how to manage the wealth. Now, that's an extreme, but you can still see issues where people don't know how to manage their wealth and they're not planning properly. Those wealth managers, this is what they do.
It's a great thing to add here.
Now, due diligence advisors, because as we were talking about the importance of due diligence, it's very complicated. There are individuals that are experts at conducting due diligence in very specific areas. That's something I would look at with expertise in how do you do the due diligence?
We've talked a lot about bundling up information to making it very transparent right off the bat. And that's a huge thing that due diligence advisors I've seen help with in the past. Those advisors can be doing it for a chunk of equity if they're on your actual advisory board, or oftentimes it's a consultant that's helping you with that too.
The last advisor that I look at are just industry experts and consultants, because you want to be talking about industry trends, competitive landscapes, growth projection. If you have an expert that knows how to crunch that data, and very often the entrepreneur, that's not their expertise, it gives you the ability to present that in a more palatable manner for the buyer.
I'll definitely throw my hat in there for consultants. If you're hiring the right consultant, you get a lot of bang for your buck. You're getting high expertise that you're not having to employ full time.
The results can be either very strong or disastrous. So from a strong one, we'll talk about those that people are familiar with or hopefully familiar with. Google's acquisition of YouTube. That was a win-win for both parties.
YouTube is what it is today because of that acquisition.
Facebook's acquisition of Instagram.
That's another great story.
Now, this one's a little bit older, but this was an unsuccessful one. News Corporation's acquisition of MySpace. MySpace was the pre-Facebook. They were the hot team, and they just fell out of disfavor. In 2005, MySpace was purchased for $580 million. 6 years later, they were sold for $35 million.
That's a sad tale, isn't it?
Probably one of the biggest busts was AOL's merger with Time Warner. There was a time where AOL was the internet. You probably aren't old enough to remember getting those discs mailed to your house by AOL.
I am not old enough for this.
If you wanted to secure AOL as an internet base, you would put the disc in your computer and they would mail you these free discs. You would be getting them all the time.
That's amazing.
They dominated the internet. In conclusion, we look at a few lessons learned from my observation. One is to have a clear value proposition. You want to make sure you have healthy financials, and you want to make sure there's a strategic fit. Are there any other lessons learned that you can pull from this, Ryan?
I think the biggest aspect of today's podcast is the advisor role. Just have an understanding of what you don't know and what expertise is out there, because there are people that this is their career, and there's lots of people willing to help you. It's the great thing about entrepreneurship.
Well, I would encourage any of our listeners, if they are starting a business, plan your exit strategy. If you are a current business owner without one, start today.
Absolutely. And if you need help with your culture, let us know.
Definitely. I'd be interested with any issues that our listeners have in this area. And we'd be more than pleased to speak with you about that because, as we've discussed, that's an area of our expertise.
Perfect. Well, I hope you have a brilliant rest of the day.
Sounds good. Let's get entrepreneurial.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. As always, you can head over to ProfSpirit.com to check out more resources and courses designed for you, the entrepreneur. Please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, and others to get the most up-to-date information as it is released.